Ever feel like caught in that constant chase for positivity? Or, feeling like you need to hit endless goals just to feel happy? What if the real secret to a good life is actually maybe not trying quite so hard and maybe embracing the mess a bit more? Welcome to the deep dive. We unpack compelling ideas, giving you that ultimate shortcut to being well informed. Today, we're diving headfirst into Mark Manson's huge bestseller, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
Oh,
We've looked at a bunch of stuff, summaries from James Clear, med school insiders, even some lively Reddit threads to really get to the core of it.
yeah, and our mission today is basically to boil down the, let's say, raw wisdom of this book into some quick insights and things you can actually use. Especially for you, navigating this world where everyone's life looks perfect online. We're going to explore why maybe leaning into negativity, owning your problems, why that might be super empowering.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this and find out what really matters. So Manson kicks things off with this idea that sounds, well, completely backwards at first. It's from the poet Charles Bukowski's Tombstone. Don't try.
That's such a stark thing to say, isn't it? What's the story there?
It's really fascinating, actually. Bukowski, he called himself a loser. He was an alcoholic, a womanizer, a gambler, struggled for decades with writing, constant rejections. His life for like 30 years was apparently just this blur of, self-loathing and failure.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker.
Yeah.
His huge success, selling millions of books, didn't happen when he was trying desperately to be a winner. It came when he just honestly wrote about being a loser. It was less about self-improvement and more about just
Yeah.
radical self-acceptance,
Yeah.
accepting the mess.
Wow. Okay, so in a world that's constantly screaming hustle, be positive, try harder,
Hmm.
how does don't try even work as a path to success?
Yeah.
That feels, super counterintuitive. It absolutely does.
Right.
And this is where Manson really starts to challenge our usual thinking,
Yeah.
especially about, like, relentless positivity. He talks about something called the feedback loop from hell. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
You feel anxious, then you feel anxious about feeling anxious,
Uh-huh.
or guilty about feeling guilty. You get stuck.
Oh, yeah, I know that loop.
Right. And society, especially, social media, kind of hammers home this idea that feeling bad is
Yeah.
wrong. It's not okay.
And then you beat yourself up for feeling those things in the first place. So what's the twist here? What's the subtle art part?
Manson calls it the backwards law. It sounds like a paradox, but
Yeah.
essentially, the harder you chase feeling good, the less satisfied you actually become. It's like trying to grab smoke.
Hmm.
So desperately wanting to be rich often just makes you feel poor because you're so focused on what you don't have, no matter how much money is actually in the bank.
That's a massive shift from how many of us operate, constantly chasing that next thing, that next feeling. So practically, how do we break out? What does this mean for someone, say, scrolling through Instagram and seeing all these perfect lives?
Exactly. It means realizing that trying so hard to filter out all the bad vibes can actually backfire and create more negativity.
Yeah.
The takeaway, really, for a lot of us, especially younger folks maybe, is learning to just allow discomfort. Let it be there. It is genuinely okay for things to suck sometimes. Seriously, don't get caught comparing your messy, real life to someone else's curated highlight reel. Everyone's got struggles, you just don't see them posted, right?
Okay, so accepting the suck sometimes. That leads into his next point about happiness, doesn't it?
He argues that happiness isn't this static thing like a place you arrive at. It's an activity. It's something you do.
An activity. How so? Because I think most people dream of a life without any problems.
Precisely. That's the common dream. But Manson's core idea here is that happiness comes from solving problems, not from avoiding them. Problems never really disappear. They get exchanged, or maybe, if you're working on the right things, they get upgraded.
Okay, example.
Think about getting fit. You had a big fitness goal. Great. But you're not problem-free now, are you? The problem of being out of shape just gets swapped for problems like waking up super early for the gym or having to track everything you eat. It's a different kind of problem.
Ah, okay. So it's not about getting rid of problems. It's about choosing which problems you're willing to put up with. Like, go to the gym, deal with soreness, don't go, deal with maybe feeling unhealthy. You're choosing your struggle.
Exactly. You're always picking your shit sandwich, as Manson colorfully puts it. And he has this funny idea, this character called Disappointment Panda.
Disappointed panda.
Yeah, the superhero who just shows up and tells you harsh truths. Because Manson says suffering is actually biologically useful. It's nature's way of inspiring change. Pain has a purpose. Stubbing your toe hurts for a reason, right? It tells you not to walk into things. Emotional pain, like rejection, teaches us stuff too, even if it stings.
So for anyone listening, the shift is, instead of chasing this mythical, pain-free happiness, maybe ask, What pain am I willing to endure? What struggles do I actually find meaningful, maybe even enjoyable in a weird way? Because that's where your real passions might be, in the struggle itself.
Nail on the head. And that connects directly to the huge role of values. What's fascinating is how your values determine the kinds of problems you have, and that dictates the quality of your life. Manson makes this distinction. Good values are based in reality, they're constructive, they're immediate, and importantly, they're controllable. Things like honesty, curiosity, self-respect.
Okay, and bad values, what do those look like in his framework?
Bad values tend to be superstitious, maybe socially destructive, and crucially not immediate or controllable by you. Think about chasing pleasure just for pleasure's sake, or making material success the absolute top priority, or needing to be popular all the time.
Ah, popularity.
Right. If popularity is your main value, your happiness is totally dependent on other people liking you. That's outside your control. But if you value something like creativity, that's internal. It's a process you engage in, something you control.
That's a huge insight, especially, yeah, for navigating online life. It
Yeah.
really makes you rethink chasing likes and followers. They feel important, but they're external, they're fleeting.
Manson would call them superficial values, right? And they lead to what he calls bad problems, insecurity, constant comparison.
Exactly. So the actionable takeaway is maybe prioritize values you can control: self-respect, honesty, learning, connection, things that are internal, they lead to better problems, and ultimately a more meaningful kind of satisfaction.
Which brings us to another really big one, responsibility. This word can sound heavy, but Manson frames it differently almost, liberatingly. The idea is we don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret it, how we respond. Absolutely. And he uses the example of William James, the father of American psychology. James went through immense suffering, illness, career failures, deep depression. But he made this conscious decision, this experiment for a year, to believe he was 100% responsible for everything in his life, no matter what external events occurred.
Wow, 100%.
100%. And this radical shift in mindset apparently transformed his life and his work. It's about distinguishing responsibility from fault. Responsibility is present tense. What do I do now? Fault is past tense.
Yeah.
Who's to blame? You might not be at fault for something awful happening.
Like Malala Yousafzai getting shot.
Exactly. Not her fault at all. But she was responsible for her response. And her response, speaking out even more powerfully, changed things.
That is powerful. You're not to blame, but you get to choose your next move.
Okay.
Connecting that to growth. What about certainty? Holding on to belief.
Right. Manson argues that clinging to certainty is basically the enemy of growth. Growth isn't this leap from being wrong to being totally right. It's more like an iterative process, going from wrong to slightly less wrong. The goal isn't the ultimate right answer, but just chipping away at today's wrongness to be a little less wrong tomorrow.
So we should be okay with being wrong.
Yeah, or at least less certain. He even says something like, all beliefs are wrong, some are just less wrong than others. Our brains are designed to make meaning, but they're biased. They want to confirm what we already think, even if it's, well, nonsense. He mentions an old psychology experiment where people thought pushing a button made a light flash randomly. They convinced themselves they'd found a pattern that wasn't there.
Huh. Okay. And that links to his law of avoidance, doesn't it? The idea that the more something threatens our identity, the more we run from it. Like the aspiring artist who never actually shows their work because being an artist nobody likes feels scarier than being an artist nobody's heard of.
Precisely that.
Yeah.
So, for anyone listening who's feeling stuck or facing a big change, the takeaway is be willing to question your deepest beliefs, especially the ones that define you, that make you feel special or right. Manson has this phrase, kill yourself, meaning your old self, obviously. Let go of rigid identities. Keeping your identity small and flexible actually makes change easier, less threatening. It's liberating.
Okay, so this all sounds great. Accepting imperfection, taking responsibility, being less certain. But how do you actually do it day to day when you're feeling stuck?
Well, Manson's answer is surprisingly, almost frustratingly simple. Just do something.
Just do something.
Yeah, he calls it the do something principle. It kind of flips the script on motivation we usually think. Motivation leads to action. He says often it works the other way around. Action leads to motivation. The action itself creates the momentum.
So don't wait until you feel like it to start that project or go for that run.
Exactly. He uses the anecdote of a novelist who forced himself to write just 200 crappy words per day. The motivation didn't come first. It flowed from the act of writing, even crappy words, like that 2-minute rule, just start something for 2 minutes. Take one tiny, ridiculously small step. That tiny action can spark the inspiration for the next step. It's simple, but man, it works.
Okay, action creates motivation. But what about focus? We live in a world with endless choices, right? Careers, hobbies, people. How do you commit without feeling massive FOMO?
Ah, yes, the paradox of choice. What's fascinating is that having more options often makes us less satisfied.
Yeah.
It fuels that fear of missing out. Manson argues that real depth, real joy and meaning often comes from long-term investment, committing deeply to maybe one relationship, one craft, one career path over decades.
So less breadth, more depth.
Pretty much. And here's the surprising bit. He says there's actually freedom and liberation in commitment. When you consciously reject alternatives, you free yourself from that constant anxiety of, did I choose the right thing? Is there something better out there?
That's huge, especially today. So the takeaway is embrace commitment. Pick what you really give a feck about and go deep. Learn to say no to the endless distractions and the superficial appeal of having a million surface-level experiences. Focus on quality.
And speaking of quality, particularly in relationships, this focus on choosing your commitments highlights how critical boundaries are. Healthy relationships, Manson argues, need clear boundaries. They need the ability for both people to say no and to hear no without the whole thing falling apart.
Whereas unhealthy ones,
Often involve people trying to solve each other's problems, usually to make themselves feel good, which creates this kind of codependent, toxic dynamic.
so it's not just about saying yes to the right things, but being okay with saying no, even if it's uncomfortable. That can be tough, especially if you're naturally a people pleaser.
It really can be. Because, and this is key, trust is the most important ingredient. But trust isn't really tested, it isn't real until there's conflict, until you can disagree, set a boundary, risk upsetting someone, and see that the connection holds. If you're just saying yes all the time to avoid conflict, the relationship is built on shaky, conditional ground.
So for you listening, a big application here is maybe stop trying so hard to please everyone. If a relationship crumbles just because you set a boundary or said no, Manson would argue it wasn't built on genuine trust anyway. Embrace the honesty that can come from conflict. It leads to real connection.
Which brings us to the final, maybe heaviest, but most fundamental point that underpins all of this.
Yeah.
Death.
Right. The ultimate reality check.
Yeah. Manson shares a very personal story about his friend Josh dying unexpectedly. He said it became the clearest before and after moment in his life. Confronting that endless and incomprehensible nothingness, as he calls it, actually freed him from a lot of his smaller anxieties and inhibitions.
He has that line, doesn't he? Death is the light by which the shadow of all of life's meaning is measured. That without death, everything would feel kind of pointless, inconsequential.
Exactly. It gives everything stakes. He talks about our immortality projects, trying to build a legacy, create lasting art, have children as ways we try to cling to the idea of living on forever. But the bitter antidote, he suggests, isn't denying death, but actually becoming comfortable with the idea of your own death. When you accept it, you can choose your values more freely without being driven by this illogical fear of oblivion.
So, for anyone listening, wrestling with big decisions or just daily fears, the actionable thought is acknowledge your mortality, not in a morbid way, but as a clarifying force. When you really internalize that you're going to die anyway, suddenly a lot of fears, potential embarrassments, failures, they just don't seem as huge, do they? You might as well just try things. It reminds me of that Bukowski quote Manson uses. We're all gonna die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We're terrorized and flattened by life's trivialities. We're eaten up by nothing.
Mm-hmm. And the ultimate lesson, maybe, is that true greatness, or maybe just living well, comes from consciously choosing what's worth giving a feck about and what isn't. Even when you're confused, even when facing the end. And in a way, you're already great just because you keep making those choices every day. You keep finding meaning in your own struggles.
Wow. Okay, what a deep dive that was. From don't try being a form of acceptance to happiness being about solving the right problems and using death as a compass. It's definitely a counterintuitive perspective, but yeah, strangely liberating.
Totally. And just to reiterate, it's not about being indifferent to everything. That's apathy, not the subtle art. It's about being intentional, choosing what aligns with your core values, and then embracing the necessary struggles that come with those choices.
So for you, the learner, here's something to chew on. If you had to pick just one problem that you actually genuinely enjoy having and working on, what would it be? And maybe more importantly, what core values would tackling that problem reflect for you?
That's definitely something powerful to mull over until our next deep dive.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
Hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you did, please give us a thumbs up, share with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. They really help us keep creating great content. And don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an episode.